Hadas kingdoms gogitu scan hangagung. Nung islanga kujus nesta kwawalagan. Stu is gan ho hathlik gayas kikwit amasta. Giau houseless tlui houseless canusta kagan klagan. Chow sali gwinung kawang o kawas isgan gudung isgan gum gurangi edong dungum. Nung hada gogit ijan o gudungum tlatskagum. Tla ela hinas canu hauselgang is tlagung.
It was Kid Kios, which is, literally old tree, which doesn't have a lot of meaning for us. But to the Haida, it was a boy. You think of this kind of beautiful, vulnerable, enchanted being, and somebody just coming in out of the blue and just cutting it down.
I wouldn't characterize Grant Hadwin as a murderer. I would characterize Grant as a person that got pushed into a trap, couldn't see any way out, and was almost screaming for someone to listen to his ideas.
As a New Englander, I could not grasp the size of British Columbia, which could absorb California, Washington, Oregon, and most of New England without a ripple. This is remote BC. This is a part of BC that even very few British Columbians have ever seen. Until you're in it, it's just hard to get it.
When Grant first started his career in forestry, he was stepping into one of the most amazing forest ecosystems on the planet. Temperate old-growth rainforests. They're magical. They take you in, and I think Grant was taken in. We don't even have a reasonable catalog of all the species that are there. We probably know less than half of the species that exist in an old-growth forest.
And that's, what's so amazing about trees. They're not as old as rocks, they're not as old as mountains, but they're much older than we are. and they see so much, they experience so much in their lifetimes. They create their own environment. And, you know, forests do that anywhere, but there's something about a coastal rainforest that, you know, it almost like being in a greenhouse or something, you know, heightened humidity, the way sound moves, the way light filters through. You know, it is, you know, it's a kind of a parallel universe. And the whole thing was kind of awe-inspiring to me. You know, the size of the trees and the types of people who work in the forest and the things that they did on a daily basis and took for granted that really were astonishing.
Grant was likely the first non-Indigenous person to see the forest that he walked into. Those forests were full of diversity and complexity that he saw and learned to understand and appreciate. However, the purpose from his employer's standpoint of Grant being there was simply to find the biggest, most valuable timber and devise methods of removing that as cheaply as possible. He was an extremely skilled, knowledgeable person. He knew what he was talking about.
He was astonishingly quick, and he did his work quickly. As his inexperienced assistant, I was frequently flummoxed as to why we were hanging ribbons in that particular location, but typically I was so out of breath I didn't ever get to ask the question. You know, I was just trying to keep body and soul together. Pretty much every step of the way, you're looking at the quality of the timber and the terrain. Those are the two factors that are sort of doing battle with each other in your mind. You see some timber that you think, that's exactly what we want, but look at the terrain. How do we get that? Does it justify this lovely timber building very expensive road to get to it?
Making your way through an untracked mountainous environment is difficult enough, but to be able to envision not just how do I get myself through here or how do I get a road through here, how do I get a semi-truck loaded with 100,000 pounds of timber through here?
Grant's skill was to imagine roads where no roads were meant to go, into forests that had, until then, stood undisturbed for thousands of years.
Again, it's one thing to make a serpentine road that you can get a donkey around or a pickup truck around, but a loaded semi is a very awkward, you know, they don't belong there.
He was, in effect, the leading edge of the knife, cutting deeper and deeper into pristine wilderness to supply markets with a bottomless appetite for prime timber.
And he was amply rewarded for this. You know, he was given a tremendous amount of autonomy. I mean, he really had this domain, you know, of, I think, of probably hundreds of square miles of trackless wilderness that was his.
That's right. There's so many great people in the community that have donated every element to this breakfast. I would be here for 5 minutes if I mentioned all their names, but come on down.
And enjoy the pancakes, and you got eggs, and you got the whole full breakfast thing, right? It's not just pancakes.
Absolutely.
And for $5. $5 can't go wrong.
There's no police up here. There's tons of freedom. You can be whatever you want to be, whenever you want to be. And not really worried too much about it. And Grant took, full measure of that, for sure.
852. Highway's looking great across the northwest. Just be aware of wildlife wandering across. Smithers, Burns Lake, and the Bulkley Valley and Lakes District.
Literally, you had the whole spectrum of human nature represented in that little village. There were some very bright people who'd grown up in the heart of Toronto, now living in little more than a shack. A lot of people were there escaping from something. You met all sorts of characters. It was a fascinating place.
Smithers is 6 and Burns Lake is 1.
Well, he was like a Billy the Kid, You walk around with a reputation. And so Grant could walk into a room, and of course the scuttlebutt is that, he can walk up a mountain faster than anybody else. And there was always somebody in the room that's going to stand up and go, the ones that worked outside, they're all in good shape too. And they would challenge Grant and, stand back, because he lived for a challenge. Many people would walk away from an experience with Grant, I think respecting him greatly, but shaking their head and think, where does this dynamo come from?
He was this incredibly vital guy who was endowed with this kind of amazing instrument in his body that could do things that other people couldn't. And, it was a source of power for him. It's what made his living. And I think his identity was, very closely tied up to, like an athlete.
Grant and I were brothers when it came to Mother Nature and just being out and being comfortable out. We didn't worry about bears or cougars or whatever is supposed to come and get you. We were just 100% at home. That's what he was all about. He was simply part of these mountains, that forest, this lake. You were with a person that was with you, body and soul. It was a pleasure to be with him. I'd have to think that Grant was at the time my best friend, for sure.
Hadwina is an archipelago of very large number of islands that sits off the west coast of British Columbia. It's a totally unique ecosystem. It's sometimes been called Canada's Galapagos. It also has been stewarded for thousands of years by the Haida, people who had place, people who understood their responsibilities to that place, and people to this day who honor that trust.
This volcano here is Tau Hill, which means place of food. So this whole North Beach area is amazing, from all the razor clams underneath the sand here, up for the next 10 miles of beach there, 10 miles that way. This is, it's a very rich land. This beach, North Beach, is the site of the where Raven discovered mankind in the giant clamshell. When he was flying around and became bored and found a giant clam and went down and coaxed the men out of the clamshell and brought them into the world.
With us, we've been here so long thousands of years, and that has a lot to do with the way we feel and think about things. It's sort of just generation after generation after generation. And with the Western world, I mean, in general, they're not that old, really. They don't have the history like natives do in parts of the world.
I fished with my dad forever. I mean, I was 4 or 5 years old, and they'd bring us up the Yukon River to food fish. And my grandfather was still alive then, and he'd be up there fishing also. When we'd work on our fish, our grandfather would make us face it upriver like this. The head going upriver. He said so that the spirit will still go upriver, even though we killed it. He always made us do that.
This is the Yukon River, which is the heart and soul of Haida Gwaii. It's the largest river on the islands, and we have all 5 species of salmon that come in here, plus steelhead and trout. This is the place where people would come to travel this river like a highway up into the center of the island, and be able to take other creeks that flow into the river and access the large stands of cedar that are found all throughout the Yukon watershed. And it's been recognized that the trees in this watershed are some of the finest in the world. This is a area that's been set aside from logging, protected due to the fact that the golden spruce is here.
The golden spruce had a range of meanings, both just as a benign, beautiful, and mysterious presence on the landscape. But on top of that, there is, a bona fide, myth, if you will, a narrative.
Kitkea Gaslingit Planas Sagwa Guada Ista Iskagan. Gin Kwanan Hadi Gin Kwan Didang Chan Sida Iskan Plagista Hansan. Sinkachad Istas Tadayan. Lanas Gutla Gutlong Iskan Hadastung Kaganagang. Nung Islanga Gutju Iskan Ulchin. Ulchinu Lastidas Kathla Iskan Gum Sulgang Kiang. Nung Islangau Gutjus Gumtluk de Gun Plad Gas Jagian. House Sulgang will Kias will stay Plagay A Ejan. Nung Islanga Su Hunter Kit Ijas Dalung Hada Gulangan. Kit Kia Su Yakun Antlangs Kungu Gangan Skakantlas Ko Gindan Hatsjuyaga.
It was a unique quirk of nature. The golden spruce did actually have this golden aura, a radiance that was derived from a genetic mutation of its needle's coloring. But for the Haida, what really makes the golden spruce stand out, it's the only living being that connects to that myth time.
One of the joys and heartbreaks of good timber cruisers is that they do see forests in a pristine state. And Grant then was tasked with rearranging it in ways that felt very, very uncomfortable to him. I think that he became quite tormented as he grew to understand these forests were irreplaceable. The idea that we can log them and regenerate them is simply just not true. We don't know how to do that. We don't know how they function.
As a road surveyor, he would go do the survey, and he had to write up a report. In the margins, he said, you know, when we get into this valley, maybe you want to leave that stand of cedar alone. And the manager, you know, his supervisors, you know, what are you talking about? Leaving trees. That's not what we do here. You know, it's like throwing fish back.
Each time he went to a place, he must have asked himself the question, should I tell them the right answer here? Should I tell them what's really here? Because if I do, it's going to be gone, and gone in an ugly, degrading way.
These requests became more insistent as he became less comfortable with what he was doing. And it's, you know, Grant, you know, are you with us or against us? You know, whose side are you on here? In fact, there was no other side because there was no one really into forest protection at that time. He's really this kind of lone consciousness. You know, he really was a voice in the wilderness, and nobody heard it.
We're helping forest products move from resource communities like Quinnell, Burns Lake, and Prince George to growing markets in Asia. And when we build connections, it means jobs and prosperity for people in British Columbia.
But Grant began to express his frustration in writing, and through his meticulously typed letters, it's possible to track the evolution of his ideas.
And depending on how you read him, you know, he's completely out of his mind, or the guy is a sage and a soothsayer.
In response to your advertisement for a forest renewal project coordinator, I do not like clear-cutting, and my philosophical differences with the forest industry run deep. If you are prepared to try a gentler approach to forestry, with less short-term profit, I may be able to help. I am not familiar with the new buzzwords such as forest renewal. All of forestry and most of the forests appear to need renewing in some form or another. I don't have a lot of ideas left on this planet without someone else jumping the institutional ship and giving me a hand. I can't do anything about this kind of denial, except to write more letters as a record and as an attack.
Well, it's what my friend wanted to build. He wanted people to know that there was going to be a log home in Goldbridge done by a logger. Well, Grant's attention to detail is just right here. And also, his futuristic approach to everything is, we were going through an epidemic, pine bark beetle epidemic, and a lot of people were saying this blue stain was going to rot on you, and nobody would really touch it. But Grant went, well, I just love that, and he was one of the first people to, in our area here anyway, to get it milled. He would have planed it down himself and put it in there, and beautiful. And same in his bathroom here. You know, the sink is set into a solid slab of, again, ponderosa pine. Everything is wood. Everything he could cover would be covered with wood. Yeah, it's good for me to be in here. I really, what he did way back then is just, it's coming back to me, you know, all the dreams a lot of us had to do things with wood, and not, you know, we didn't want to see them wasted. It was a big part of it. And then what are you going to do with you know, stained wood? And everyone's saying, oh, it'll rot, it'll do this, it'll do that. And it didn't. It's still here, and it is incredibly beautiful. Yeah, well done, Grant. Yeah, well, he's here with us. You bet.
To me, it said, you know, I'm planning to stay here. This is my place. I think there may have been something, I'm going to build the biggest, most beautiful house in town with this beautiful view, a view presumably that he wanted to look at for a long time. But that view began to change because of the roads he was making. Each road, you know, was like opening this can of worms, and the road would go into the valley, the loggers would come into the valley, fell the valley, and go.
And this was going on not just in Grant's backyard, but in valleys up and down the west coast of North America. And for most people, it was happening largely out of sight and out of mind.
The logging industry changed dramatically with the advent of mechanized logging. What that meant was that you could log and produce logs up to 10 times faster with a mechanized system than you could with most manual systems. That compounded the problem by a factor of 10, how rapidly forests could be changed from a forest ecosystem into a degraded landscape. The timber industry is a good example of the dominant Western or colonial ethic that is anthropocentric or human-centered. A human-centered value system sees Earth as here for us to use as we see fit. It's a bunch of resources that don't have any value until we make them into something that has a monetary value. That means that one species, us, drives all the decisions. They're all made for us and our benefit. With an anthropocentric value system, you say, which trees are the most valuable? How can I get them out of there in the cheapest way? In contrast, a kin-centric ethic, kin literally means relations. When Indigenous people say all my relations, they're not talking about just their human relations. They're talking about the rocks, the fish, the whole system. With a kincentric value system, the first question is, should I take a tree?
We selectively harvested out just the particular trees that we wanted, and you go into an area 100 years later or even 50 years later, you don't even see where the haida had been unless you really look hard and you dig around, and you can find like the stumps of giant trees that were once used for canoes or totem poles or houses. You would cut down a tree in the wintertime when the sap is not running and the tree is lighter, then work on it the following year. Most of the times a chop was put into the tree, and it was called looking into the heart of the cedar. So you'd be able to see into the center and see how sound the tree is and for what purpose that could be used for.
When I'm doing totem poles, everything has to flow and be related to each other. The area I'm working on the pole here now is, he's wearing a hat, and this is a raven with a broken beak. So if you look at it, there's a raven here, and this here is a helmet, that's this figure here. And this is the wing of the raven with a broken beak, and there's a wing coming out the side out of this guy's, and the tail will be all the way around it for both figures. This tree here is about 400 years old. In our connection, I mean, even doing this tree is still living, it's cracking, it's moving, right? I'm changing the form to another form.
In the Haida's view of the world, human life and tree life are the same. We are all spirits in various forms. So as we pass through this life, we may have a human form, we may have a tree form in our next life, or a rock, or a fish. And that understanding, that belief, really grounds you in respect for everything. And that's where the golden spruce played such an important role to the Haida.
We're so connected with everything. That's why we have so many transformation stories. To us, we're all one. That's never changed. We're all part of each other. So when you lose one piece, it's like losing one of the family. Well, it makes me more, I guess the word is cautious of what I'm doing, on how I'm doing it, because I don't want to do more damage.
In the beginning, human beings were given a sacred trust to act as the guardians of life on Earth. Apparently, the original intent was for us to use all life with respect, compassion, and discretion. We were to pass this message and the torch of life to succeeding generations as a bountiful trust fund in perpetuity. We managed quite nicely, as long as we maintained direct connections and interactions with living organisms. These connections produce inner contentment, harmony, sensitivity, and respect, which few people other than the indigenous peoples understand. We started going wrong by losing this direct contact with life.
I think there were some very heated arguments, and eventually he did quit. He just couldn't hack it anymore. And he said, you know, how do I make a living off this place that I know and love, doing what I like to do, doing what I know how to do, but how do I do it in a way that doesn't destroy it? And so I'll log trees that are already dead, that have been killed by natural means. And he went off to start his own logging company using beetle-killed timber.
See, that's probably some of the slabs that he cut off. You know, it's grown up so much now. It was probably maybe right over here. It would be the mill site, and then he would drag all the timber down this little road over here. He would drag it from back in there. He would fall it, skid it, mill it, pile it, and you can see the sawdust pile further over there. You can see where he pushed the sawdust over. So this is definitely the mill site right here.
Again, it was just a bizarre thing to do. You know, it's like early recyclers. You know, imagine being, you know, recycling cans in 1964. You know, why would you do that? It just didn't compute. I don't think there was even hostility toward it. It just, what a bizarre concept.
When he'd fall trees, he would fall trees all in the same place if he could. He would wedge a tree over that was laying the other way just to get it to fall so it wouldn't disturb what was left. And as you can see, it saved a lot of trees. I don't know of any other one-man sawmill setup. Logging, skidding, road building, and cutting. And loading. I mean, it was never ending.
A typical Grant worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, until finally he had an accident at work. A jack broke and slipped and hit him in the jaw and broke it. And he came looking for me and asked if I could help him through this. And I'll tell you, I sure wanted to. It was a sort of a hard time for me. I was busy, but I really wanted to go help him. But I ended up having to say no. And that wasn't such a good thing. He understood, but I think, I let him down.
In the end, Grant couldn't make the sawmill pay. I think his ideals simply ran up against commercial reality. But he had to make a living, and eventually he was forced to leave Goldbridge to look for work back in the industry. I think he was searching or hoping for the kind of employment that might accommodate some of his ideas and also his anxieties.
Well, the reason that Grant came to McBride is he was contacted through a friend of mine that recommended him for doing the type of work that was here.
When you get into the steep ground that you see around the McBride area and you see other places, you know, in parts of the interior, it's just not a matter of putting a road in. It's a matter of getting it in the very best place. If you do not, the costs soar, slides happen, all kinds of problems. So it's really the key.
I did the same type of work as Grant, exactly the same. I was a layout person that became a manager of an operation. And I love to do that. Love it now, loved it then. So he related to that. And then right away, we seemed to kind of kick it off talking about family and different things. And so that really helped. And then we talked about the environment. I didn't bring it up. Grant Hadwin brought it up because he wasn't too sure he wanted to work for us. First he wanted to know my opinion, and then he went out and took a look at things, and then he came back and said he'd work for us. And I'd never had anybody ever do that before.
We put him in the most sensitive spots, and he saved us all kinds of money. And really that was a consequence of the man's ability and the fact that he cared the way he did.
He knew he was participating in something that was destroying a world that he loved, to which he felt a deep connection. And however open his new employer was to his beliefs, there was an inescapable logic to the work he was doing. And for Grant, it was impossible to ignore the consequences.
Well, this is a clear cut. It's not a forest anymore. It's the tree structure is gone here, literally gone. This is about tree farming, and it's not about forests. It's about growing small trees in the future and cutting them down again, while calling it sustainable forestry. Forests are built on dead trees. That's what creates soil, stores and filters water, makes the system work. No natural disturbance cuts down all the trees, loads them on a truck, and hauls them to the mill. This is now planned to be a chronic disturbance. Every 50 to 70 years, we're going to come back and do this again and again. And as you do that, you wear out the biological legacies of trees that have been living and dying here for thousands of years. In terms of what this has to do with someone living on the other side of the planet, is we're doing the same thing on the other side of the planet.
This has always been a resource extraction island for the logging companies. It's just a place where they send crews in and get really, really good high quality wood that makes a lot of money. The river is right down at the bottom of the valley. Everything on this side, on our side, all the ways up to where we're standing has been clear cut. Some of the last of the largest clear cuts in British Columbia were permitted in this watershed. And over on the other side is all pretty much intact, old growth, temperate rainforest. The cut blocks logging is starting to come in here, and they've got plans pretty much to log off everything here. You know, the unemployment rate in Old Masset, for instance, has hovered around 90% unemployment. And we're watching the loaded log barges going right past our doorsteps every 3 days. Biggest log barges on earth, going out with the finest timber on earth, right past our doorsteps while we're starving. And sometimes there'd be one loaded one going past the village and an empty one coming in at the same time.
In the forest industry, it's like you're a killer if you're out there chopping trees down. And to some degree, you know, there's some truth there that this is a tree that's surviving. There is a difference between alive and dead with a tree. No doubt about it. In the spring, the sap runs up their bark, they grow, they're alive. For some reason, you cut them down, you've just cut off their lifeline. And they hit the ground, and from there, they're dead. And I remember one day being out there and hammering trees over and working like crazy, and tree after tree you're knocked down that day. And I came home and I said to my wife, you know, I heard the trees crying today. Life can really wake you up sometimes. Moments of truth. Not just to be truthful, but the whole picture around you has to make sense.
One time he comes back to us and he tells me that he's had an epiphany and he does not feel as a type of work that what he's doing is all wrong. And when he was telling me this, he wasn't even looking at me. He was looking past me. And it was just the weirdest doggone thing. Like, it was just like he was just spaced out.
And I think he came out of there with a kind of blazing, kind of Old Testament desert father clarity. I can't do this anymore. I can't participate in this anymore. And I have to devote my life to stopping it.
And you got to remember, you have this guy that has all this strength in him, a body and mind. You know, he's not a regular person. This guy is prime shape. There's nothing outside that he cannot do, and probably do just about better than anybody else. So, you know, an exceptional person. And this exceptional person now is off balance.
He became more mission-oriented and had this kind of sense that I'm gonna fix it. It's kind of like a spotlight swinging around looking for something to fixate on.
The log barges that transport timber from the islands of Haida Gwaii have been a tempting target for logging protests. This week, the local Haida community joined environmental activists. In spite of their coordinated action, the protesters failed to prevent the loading and departure of any log barges. Haida Gwaii has become the focus of a national campaign against the logging of BC's coastal rainforest.
Recent satellite mapping is just showing that at least 50% of Canada's rainforest is already gone, because our assessment shows that within 5 to 10 years, all of the remaining pristine valleys will either be roaded or clear-cut logged.
The forest industry in British Columbia appears to be one example of economic remote-controlled terrorism on this planet. With professionals leading the way in severe symptoms of denial that there is any problem. The indigenous peoples are not guilty of major crimes against life because of mitigating circumstances, as are many others who have been severely abused and traumatized through no fault of their own.
What the Haidas got to see once, twice a week were these 400-foot barges carrying out thousands and thousands of cubic foot of virgin timber, you know, basically carting their patrimony off, week in and week out, year after year after year. It was deeply painful to them, and it was also, you know, in its own way, very upsetting to Grant. And I think that there was a kind of dovetailing of interests and sentiments there.
Here was a place whose conflicts Grant could identify with, a place where he might be able to play out his own internal battles.
I was with my mother managing a motel, and he was staying there. The first impression was just that he was really abrupt and not very friendly, but like strangely needy of me in the moment. It was like, hey, can you do something for me? And I was like, okay, sure.
Turn it this way.
But then that moment was extended to a walk down to the beach so that I could take photographs of him while he was swimming in the ocean. And I was serving his purpose at this point, I guess. And so my impression just kept building. He became this amazingly tough, eccentric character. He was an intense guy. His build, his physique. This man could swim in the ocean on Haida Gwaii in November, so that's 6 degrees if you're lucky. He was on the way back opening up to me a little bit, I suppose, and just volunteering some information about himself. And then when we got back to his room, he wanted to show me that he had like stacks of papers of correspondence that he was trying to generate to voice an opinion about something that he believed in but really wasn't connected to.
Professional remote control projects are operating worldwide.
I think he was desperate to have a meaningful purpose.
Driftnet fishing in the oceans, clearing and burning the jungles, polluting the skies.
He was trying all these different ways to get the message out. He was writing to doctors, and he was writing to politicians, and he wrote to the Queen, to the police, newspapers. He's trying to find a medium that people will understand, that will get the message through.
Never accept the professional reality because you think that it is impossible to change that reality.
I think the golden spruce was another medium to deliver the message.
The logging company had preserved a small park around the site of the golden spruce, and it had become a significant tourist attraction. Anyone who came to the islands would take a walk down the golden spruce trail to see the strange and beautiful tree across the river.
There's a short walk from the pullout to the lookout. And it probably took us an hour and a half to do that. 20-minute hike. He changed, like he became animated. He did talk about himself a lot. He talked passionately about his experience of the forest. Then he started talking about where we were specifically and his opinion about it.
The Golden Spruce Trail was a white man's trail, built by the logging company as their little nod to conservation. There were no signs to indicate that this was a sacred site to the Haida, but even if there had been, I'm not sure Grant would have noticed.
I think there was a tunneling of his vision. And, when that happens, when you become obsessed, your ability to, metabolize and integrate nuance is really seriously compromised. There's something wrong with this picture if you look at it through Hadwin's eyes. 12 acres, that's, 5 hectares, has been preserved around this tree and protected. And he's looking at this. They're protecting this, and they're cutting down all of that, which is some of the most beautiful, old, massive cedar and Sitka spruce on Earth. It would take a logger to see it. It would take a logger who'd had an awakening to see it. So this is the one tree they care about. This is the one they care enough to save.
He posed by the tree and I snapped a shot. But there was this turning point, right? Like when we were at the tree and then we came back. the conversation changed. He was saying that for groups of people that are passionate about a cause, a terrorist could be a class hero. That their sacrifice is something that really enables what a community badly needs. He needed that journey through that space, and possibly even a person like myself there to justify it, to say that this is a beautiful forest, and this beautiful forest used to be everywhere.
Dear Sir or Madam, I don't care much for freaks, whether they teach in university classrooms, sit in corporate boardrooms, perform in the circus, or are put on display as examples of old-growth forest. I mean this action to be an expression of my rage and hatred towards university-trained professionals and their supporters, whose ideas, ethics, denials, part-truths, and attitudes appear to be responsible for most of the abominations done towards life on this planet made in the name of progress. During the early morning of the 20th and 21st of January, I put the falling cuts into this tree known as the golden spruce. I didn't enjoy butchering this magnificent creature, but you apparently need a wake-up call that even you should be able to understand. It was challenging to leave this majestic plant in a temporary vertical position. The next storm will cause this 1,000-year-old plant to fall into or near the Yaqun River. Please find enclosed some of the last known photographs of the golden spruce. Yours truly, Grant Hadwin.
Grant used his expertise to leave the golden spruce standing long enough to get himself off island when it actually fell. So he cut just enough of it so it would remain standing. But he knew how tall it was, knew that big storms blew through there. The idea was that the next big storm would bring it down. And he knew that this would give him a window to get his message out, explaining why he'd done it. The plan was to have the tree fall across the Yaqun, basically across the golden spruce path. So people coming to look at it would see it felled right across their path, and it would, be this kind of spectacular, hideous sight. I'd say it backfired woefully, and I think he was really taken aback by the hostility that he engendered. People wanted to kill him. People hated him for that. Still do. It brings tears to people's eyes. So, and I don't think he wanted that. I think he wanted to hurt the powers that be.
I can't see him being any different than a logging company. I mean, it's the same mentality. I mean, if there's the only one in the world and you cut it down, I mean, how does that make you different than a logging company that's cutting all around it?
I always remember it from when I was a kid. It was part of me growing up. Same with a lot of my aunts and uncles and grandparents. It's always been there in their lifetime too. Kind of like cutting down one of the family sort of thing.
I went into a public meeting about the golden spruce. People gathered together and people were voicing their anger about what had happened, what they would like to do to him. And I took the opportunity to stand up in the public and let people know, like, that's only one tree. Our responsibilities to this place is much bigger than one tree. It's about all the trees. And because we've been bottlenecked into silence for so long, This became the pressure point. This became the release for people to let out some of those feelings and emotions. And I believe a lot of those feelings and emotions were about all of the forests of Haida Gwaii. This reminds me of the injustice that's been done to the land. This reminds me of the injustice that's been done to the forests out of pure greed. And this is symbolic of every single tree that's been cut down and taken away from Haida Gwaii.
I was one of the last people to see the old-growth forest before it was logged. At various times, I stuck my oar in to try to save this piece or that piece, without any success. So I guess I started to get pretty cynical. I'm splashing water in the collective faces of people asleep at the switch, who are allowing the annihilation of the forests to go unchecked. When someone attacks one of these freaks, you'd think it was a holocaust. But the real holocaust is going on somewhere else.
When Grant cut down the golden spruce ironically became the focus of everyone. People that wanted to support the industry view were able to denigrate Hadwin for a horrible action. There's no question about that. But he became the focus and the golden spruce became the focus. And so tragically, what Grant was trying to do actually got lost in the way he did it.
What he had done was so strange and unprecedented. I just think there wasn't, if he'd stolen an outboard motor or beaten somebody up or set fire to a building, you just know what to do as a cop. In any case, he was, given a court date.
There were people on the ferry traveling over to Prince Rupert to be there when Grant Hadwin got on the boat to, intimidate him or whatever on the ferry ride over for his court date.
He didn't want to fly. He didn't want to take the ferry because he was afraid there are all these other people on the ferry that they would take revenge on him. And so he decided, I'm going to paddle there. And, in a way, it's kind of a uniquely Hadwinian solution to the problem. I'm going to use this, extraordinary power and confidence. That's kind of maybe his sort of default position was this body that didn't quit, and that could do anything he asked of it.
There aren't that many customers that you really remember that vividly, but I definitely remember Grant Hadwin. No, there's no doubt about it. He was larger than life in some ways, but a bit scary too. He told me that he was going to paddle across to Haida Gwaii for his court case. And I said, you can't paddle across Hecate Strait in the wintertime in a kayak. You just can't do it. He said, oh yes, I can. And then we started talking about the chart.
So this is the chart that you were requesting.
I said, well, to go straight across Hecate Strait in the winter is very, very dangerous. I said, maybe you should do what the First Nations people have always done. They go north. So they had the wind and the tide to work with them instead of against them. And he accepted that premise very easily and said it sounded like a great idea. And I really think that's what he was intending to do when he went north. But I think he ran into a little more than he could handle.
It's part of the willful blindness of this society. They want to put me to death for one tree, but not say a word about corporations felling innumerable trees. In the light of my seemingly dangerous kayak trip across the Hecate Strait, people say that I should be concerned for my mental health. Well, I worry about theirs. I have to say, someone should take a look at who's sane and who's insane. I'm now looking forward to the peace and quiet of the open ocean.
Last he was seen was, I think, Point Seward, which is, I think, 10 or 20 miles north of Rupert. And he was just heading north, about a mile offshore, stiff winds, but not stormy, and just going. I think he believed he could make it, or he believed he could make it somewhere. It's very unclear if he was going to run away or if he was just going to island hop around.
The impression I got was that that's why he wanted to go to court. He wanted to explain his reasoning for cutting down the tree.
Someone said, well, he's now going to have to go and face a judge. And I started to think, oh, well, that's going to get to be pretty funny because there isn't anybody that's going to judge Grant Hadwin.
I think on some level he understood that he had done something beyond recall. There's no way to talk his way back out of this. And, where are you going to go after that? He's infamous now. He's going to be hated, or misunderstood at least wherever he goes. Where's the refuge? And you kind of, it did cross my mind, maybe he just kind of let the sea take him. Even if he fought for his life for as long as he could, it just doesn't matter out there. It doesn't matter if you're Grant Hadwin or a polar swimmer. It's just too big and too far and too hard.
What's special about what we're looking at is that it's a forest, but it's been logged. I think one of the things that Grant would have appreciated first and foremost here is design and creativity. What happened here started from people's hearts, not from their brains, and it started with understanding that you needed to have finesse, not horsepower, that you needed to take carefully, not brutally. This forest embodies concentric values because it is a forest. It's a forest that's had some logging, but it's first and foremost a forest. It's first and foremost whole. I started to do, and I continue to do what I do in forests because I first and foremost love forests. I feel at home here, and I want to be a part, you know. I don't want to be a problem. and Indigenous people showed me a way to do that.
We are living in a modern age now with all the modern things that go on. But to me, it's about just taking what you need, no more, and always trying to leave it either in the same state you found it or even a little better if you can, without doing too much abuse to it, so that there's always something for tomorrow.
I think Grant understood really well that what you do to the forest, you do to yourself. And if you take care of the forest, you'll take care of yourself. But if you ignore that, ultimately you crawl away feeling pretty badly about what you've done.
He didn't think what he did was illegal or, you know, anything. He just wanted to ring a bell. Hello, everybody. Let's talk about our environment here. So I hear he didn't make it. So I say that's because he's still paddling.
It's interesting talking to homicide detectives on both sides of the US-Canadian border, and they smelled a rat somewhere. Neither one of them was prepared to say it was an accident. There's too many loose ends. Four months later, investigators found Grant's wrecked kayak about 100 kilometers north of Haida Gwaii. And there were some oddities to this wreck. The kayak was destroyed, but all the gear was in strangely perfect condition. It was all intact, and on top of that, it had all come ashore at pretty much the same spot. I think the strangest feature, though, was the location of this hatchet. Unlike all the other stuff, that floated around, it had all washed up in a kind of logical, linear fashion with that last high tide. The axe, on the other hand, was much further up the beach, and it's heavy, so what would carry it there? But what made his disappearance much more than a question of whether he made it or not was the discovery of Hadwin's judgment. Not a suicide note, but Grant's carefully distilled critique of our past mistakes and his vision for an alternative future.
I, Grant Hadwin. I am the author and distributor of the Judgement. This document finds humanity guilty of gross disrespect towards all life. If the original intent of your creation had apparently been twisted from respect to hatred, from compassion to oppression, and from generosity to greed, what would you do? A democratic society is morally responsible for the actions of its institutions. It is the responsibility of all individuals to resist crimes against life.
Hadas kingdoms gogitu scan hangagam. Nung islanga gujus nesta kwawalagan. Tla ela hinas ganu hauselgang is tlagan.